I'm honored to be with all of you who make such a difference every day as caregivers. And I started out the day, by the way, this morning. I gave the opening remarks to a group called Angels in Adoption. And it goes back 21 years, and I was one of them back many years ago when I was in the Senate. And these are members of Congress who nominate families in their district or state that have been in the foster care program or the adoption program and make a difference in children's lives. And they honor the members, the families that an individual member of Congress has chosen. They come to Washington for a day, and they receive their award, and then they go around and visit offices to talk about issues that they have to deal with in the area of adoption and foster care. Today, they were the largest group that's ever come in 21 years. Over 300 families in all 50 states this morning were represented in bringing their case, again, as caregivers, dealing with foster care. And the trouble is, I was telling them the story that I grew up as one of 6 children. I remember the day exactly. I think I was 10 or 11 years old, and my Aunt Mary and Uncle Phil adopted 2 boys. They were 12 and 13. You can imagine adopting children at that age. And I remember the day they were coming to our house to meet us, and how exciting it was to have these new cousins be coming. And I'll never forget, because they came to the house and spent 3 or 4 hours with us, and they never took off their coats, their winter coats. And of course, we didn't understand what was going on. But they had bounced around in so many foster care situations that they had no confidence that any place was ever going to be settled and safe. And my Aunt Mary and Uncle Phil, today, Ray and Roger, have had great lives, been very successful with families of their own and moving on. But I think of my Aunt Mary and Uncle Phil, out living in a small town of Mansfield, Connecticut, and bringing in these 2 children, aged beyond the age that most people have a chance of being adopted or in a decent situation, and what a difference they made as caregivers in the lives of these 2 young children. My parents died very young. My father, some of you are old enough, I remember, was actually a member of the United States Senate as well. And my parents died at age 63, both of them. And so I listened to people growing up who were in that sandwich generation, where their parents were taking care of them and had their own children. I thought, well, that's not going to happen to me because my parents are gone along the way. What I didn't realize is I was the 5th of 6 children, and I have something called siblings, delightful siblings along the way. And with modern medicine being what it is and so forth, I've been able to have longer lives than probably would have expected only a generation ago. And so of my 4 siblings, my oldest brother Tom, my sister Carolyn, my brother Jeremy, and my brother Nicholas. My sister Martha passed away a few years ago. And so I'm the primary caregiver of my 4 siblings. Now, they're in different stages of all of this. My brother Tom has cancer. He's struggling with that. He still teaches at Georgetown University, in fact, and has for 50 years in Latin American history. My sister Carolyn was blind from birth, and yet has been a remarkable independent woman. She revived the American Montessori system of teaching in the United States with 8 other women back in the 1950s, and then taught or ran Montessori schools, and then transferred the technology and the knowledge she had learned into the inner city public schools in Hartford, Connecticut. And she's today got a weaving class and all sorts of things. So she doesn't need she's the most independent of my siblings in many ways. And, but I still go up and visit her at the assisted living program where she is. My brother Jeremy, sadly, as those of you who have family members with Alzheimer's, in very deep trouble. And he's been 4 or 5 years now, but it's 24/7 care. And needless to say, and I have 2 young children. I have a 14-year-old and an 18-year-old daughters. And so all of a sudden, this is the financial burden, in a sense. I talked to my younger brother, Nicholas, has diabetes, has always been in sort of difficulty and trouble along the way, and so has required a lot of attention all his life, coming the way. Now, people say, well, that's an awful burden. Well, first of all, there are people in this room today who deal with much more serious issues, and I'm fortunate enough financially to be able to take care and do some of the things. But I want to share something with you that I think, and Adrian Schweers, my good friend, is here, who works with the Bipartisan Policy Committee, and I'm working on the Family and Medical Leave Act, PAID Act, with her and several others. And I don't know if you share this view, and I want to be able to say it carefully because I want to make sure it's understood properly. I have the gift of taking care of my siblings. It is a blessing. I can't begin to tell you what joy it brings to me to know that I can take care of my brother Jeremy with Alzheimer's, that I can check on my sister Carolyn to see how she's doing, that I can visit my brother Tom and take him to lunch and do different things with him here in Washington, and my younger brother Nick, to do everything I can to take care of him. This is a blessing, to be able to take care of someone else. It's got its burdens. Others have much more burden than I will ever have to take care of. It's interesting in a sense that how I came to this, aside from the personal experience, John, was at Mass one Sunday in the little village in Connecticut where I live. I walked back in the back of the church at the end of the service, and there was a woman there by herself with a child in a wheelchair that was so physically underdeveloped and in deep trouble than anyone I'd ever seen, frankly. And her name was Jacinta. And I leaned down and held her hand. And I'll never forget, her mother turned to me about 20 minutes later and said, "You're the first person to ever touch Jacinta, other than her family." She was that developmentally in trouble. Jacinta shouldn't have lived for another year, maybe. She lived to be 23. We had the same birthday, Jacinta and I. And she was the author of the Family and Medical Leave Act. Not me, Eva was. Because she was a working mother, alone, trying to take care of this child. Obviously had overwhelming needs along the way. And yet there was no respite for her, and trying to juggle those events. And so it said to me, this has got to be a more common problem than this one person I met in the back of a church. And so I began a 9-year journey, that's how long it took, through 2 vetoes, to adopt the Family and Medical Leave Act. Ironically, 26 years ago, exactly the year, John, that this, the Caregivers Action Network started under a previous different name at the time, but nonetheless, it was the same year, 1993. It was the very first piece of legislation Bill Clinton signed into law as a new president. It was about 10 days after he was sworn in January of 1993. Interestingly, by the way, I called him not long ago, in fact, on the 26th anniversary of the bill, and he told me something very interesting. He said, of all the legislation, all the various bills and ideas we were involved in, every single day someone stops me and thanks me for the Family and Medical Leave Act. The problem was it was unpaid. And so an awful lot of women, particularly, who are single parents in most cases, here could not afford to take 12 weeks of unpaid leave. So we're in the battle right now of trying to pass a paid leave bill. 8 states in the country have already done that to make a difference. Now, hardly 12 weeks, but it's a long time, some people's minds. When you're dealing with Alzheimer's, when you're dealing with a developmentally disadvantaged child, you can go down the list, 12 weeks is just a week of time in terms of what the needs are. So we've got long-term care issues to deal with. So, John, I appreciate this. I often say you shouldn't be honored for what you're supposed to do. I always said to John, look, I'll tell you what, if you don't give me an award, I'll stay twice as long if you'd like. So I thank you for the beautiful piece of glass here. And I'm really sorry, and I'm sorry she couldn't be here. I have a daughter that's applying to college this year, and so we're deeply involved in applications. But the person who really deserves this is my wife, Jackie. What people don't understand about caregiving, particularly in these issues I've discussed with you, is how you almost need to hire an accountant. I often wonder, how do people who are struggling and didn't have the advantage of being able to understand the paperwork and things involved between Medicare and Medicaid and insurance policies and the like? It is daunting. And my wife, Jackie, does this every day for my siblings on the paperwork side of all of this. She's not a blood relative, only by marriage being involved, and she cares for my siblings as much as if they were her own siblings along the way. So I'm very fortunate, and I really would like her to be here because I'd give her this glass. She really is the one who deserves so much of this. But I thank you again for inviting me to come along. Rosalind Carter. We've all been reading about Jimmy Carter being in a hospital these days at age 95. And I know there's a lot of appreciation for Rosalind. I got to know her particularly because of mental health issues. In fact, a good friend of mine, Paul Gianfrido, I can't see with the lights on, but Paul is here. Paul and I have known each other for many, many years from Middletown, Connecticut, is one of the total leaders in this country on mental health issues. And I always tell this story because I didn't tell anyone at the time I did this, but now I can tell you. The most difficult piece of legislation I ever was involved in, the most unpopular thing I ever did as a legislator in the Congress, was drafting the TARP legislation, where we gave $700 billion to about 12 banks in the wake of the financial crisis. Needless to say, not a popular idea at the time, put it mildly. But what I did that day, because it came to the House, the bill, we wrote the TARP legislation, but I needed a vehicle. It just couldn't bring it up separately. Under the rules of the Congress, as you'll remember, John, you have to attach it to something. A mental health parity bill had been passed in the House. Rather radical piece of legislation. No likelihood it was going to be adopted in the Senate, but it was sitting at the desk. And so without telling anybody, I took the mental health parity bill and I put the TARP legislation on it. So we passed the TARP, but I knew that day we had mental health parity for the first time in the United States of America. I learned that trick from John and Bob Dole. They taught me how to do that along the way here. Smuggling something in. They thought it had a great value and merit. Anyway, I've talked too long. This goes way beyond the time I said. But I thank all of you, what you're doing. And this is those of you who support this, Gillette, obviously, is a corporate winner. Richard Liu, co-recipient tonight, who does wonderful things and heard stories about his dad and so many other things going on. So we'll just stay committed to it. But for those of you who are going through it personally, I don't know if you share my view about what a sense of joy I have being able to take care of and work with my siblings along the way. And if you feel that way about it, it makes it something that you can embrace. And I know it's hard, I know it's burdensome, and it puts tremendous pressure on families along the way. But my 14-year-old and 18-year-old, they talk to my siblings. They'll call my brother Jerry with Alzheimer's and talk to him on the phone a day and talk about him and what they're doing with their days and so forth. I don't know if my brother Jeremy hears it all, gets it all or not, but they enjoy doing it. It gives them joy to be able to talk to their uncle and say things to him. So there is that joy that I always feel about the ability and the opportunity I've been given by this blessing to take care of siblings. So I thank you for the award. I'll give it to my wife, as I've said, because of all the things she does. But please keep up what you're doing, and it makes such a difference. And I've said to others, invite me back next year so I can sit out at the table and eat the good food and support the next recipient hand here. But I really do express my gratitude to each and every one of you here, the corporate sponsors and others what do. And John, thank you for what you do. It means an awful lot. Thanks.